a skeleton collecting dust in the Smithsonian, an oil painting rescued from a pile of junk, and the greatest racehorse in history. These are the ingredients in horse. I'm Ann Bocock, and welcome to Between the Covers. Geraldine Brooks is here. She's a master storyteller and the Pulitzer Prize winner for her novel, March. She has a new book, and it is, in a word, stunning. The title is Horse. It's the story of perhaps the most extraordinary athlete of the 19th century, and he just happened to be a horse. Geraldine, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It's so nice to see you.
It's lovely to be with you, Anne.
And I wish we were doing this face-to-face, and honestly, I wish we were doing this face-to-face, not here in the studio, but sitting at your table. That is the most magnificent view. So it's beautiful.
Thank you. It's an elmwood table from a tree that fell down on the property, so we were able to repurpose it and give it a second life.
Oh, what a great story. That could be your next book. I want to talk about horse. This is reimagining the greatest racehorse in history. You write this in several timelines, but to start out, if we could set up the story in the 1850s, there is a trainer, his name is Jarrett, and the horse is the magnificent Lexington. Would you take it from there?
You know, when I write novels, I like to stick to as much of the known history as I can. And the story of Lexington, the racehorse, is incredibly well documented because thoroughbred racing was such a passion in the 19th century. It really united all kinds and classes of people. They were just really fascinated by the competitions between the great racehorses of the day. And Lexington was the greatest of all of them. So there was an awful lot that I could find out about the horse, but about the people around the horse, that was where the work became a little harder, because the people who were responsible for his early success were Black and enslaved, and they didn't get a chance to really tell their story. So I had to find them in the crevices of history, in letters between the thoroughbred owners talking about the skills of the trainers and the grooms, and in the paintings of the time, because the rich thoroughbred owners would love to have paintings done of their horse, and the artists often included the trainers and the grooms and the jockeys. So we can see what somebody like Jarrett looked like, and that we can't know what it was like to be him. So that's where the novelist's imagination has to go to work.
Geraldine, horse racing was truly a national obsession. I don't even know if there's any sport or anything now that we could compare it to. Maybe football.
Well, it'd be football if we all had pads and helmets in our closets and went out and played ourselves, you know, because with the horses, it was still a very agrarian country and everybody had a horse, or they were only one generation away from having a horse. And so they knew what made a great horse, and they loved, you know, racing against each other. There used to be quarter horse races just in every main street, but the gigantic thoroughbred match races that were the national obsession often were proxies for competition between North and South, and who there was a tremendous amount of prestige involved. And yet all this was built on, you know, the plundered labor of enslaved people, particularly in the South.
Let's talk about that for just a moment. You have this industry of racing alongside slavery. Now, as I'm reading this book, the significance of the Black horsemen in this period cannot be understated. But there is this balance, is there not?
So the interesting thing is, because they had such skill and expertise, and it was so valuable to the thoroughbred owners, they occupied a very different status to other enslaved people. And so you see them being able to do things that were denied to most enslaved people, like travel interstate, bringing the horses from one barn to another, even acquiring property in their own name, and that often led to some of the best trainers and jockeys being able to eventually buy their own freedom and then become free blacks and go into business for themselves.
Horse is the story of a racehorse, a celebrity racehorse. But there are other storylines in this book, and the book overall is also the story of race in America, past and present. And I would really like you to comment on that.
Yeah, well, I became horse crazy, not at a sensible age like most people who are going to be horse crazy do it at 5 or 15. I was 50 when I took my first riding lesson, and then became so horse obsessed it was all I wanted to think about. And so when I heard the story of Lexington, it was quite by chance, an overheard conversation from an official from the Smithsonian Institution who had just delivered the horse's skeleton from an attic in the Museum of Natural History down to the International Museum of the Horse in Lexington, Kentucky. So Lexington had come home. And I thought I was just going to be writing a story about a fantastically fast and incredibly brave racehorse who had an extraordinary twist to the story that happened during the Civil War. And that was going to be enough for me. But once I got started into the research, I realized that it was going to touch on the lives of the Black horsemen who had trained and cared for Lexington. And I wanted to write about the science around the bones at the Smithsonian because I just find it fascinating to get behind the scenes and see how things are done at museums and in research. And from there, I knew that I'd have a 21st century storyline as well. And I couldn't leave the story of race in the past as if it was something that was over and done with.
It begs the question of when did you write this book? Because the contemporary part strikes home. It is so in our face now. When did you start writing that part of the story?
Well, I started writing it in 2016, and there was a lot going on in the 6 years that it took me to complete this book. So much happened in race relations in this country, with the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the other movements and the roiling turmoil as we came to a reckoning with race today. So the noise of that was pretty loud, and it was something that I couldn't ignore, and I didn't want to ignore it either. So it worked its way into the story. I have a contemporary Black character who is a Nigerian-American art historian. And there's a very intriguing bit of history around a painting of the horse that has a very extraordinary provenance and came to the Smithsonian in an unexpected way. So he is the character who explores the history of the paintings of the horse.
I'm going back to the 1850s for just a moment. There was a law forbidding Blacks from owning and running horses, was there not? And these were the same people that were making sure that all of the white horse owners were making a lot of money.
Well, yeah, it depended on the racetrack, but many racetracks had a ban on any Black person racing a horse in their own right, in their own name. So there are a lot of sort of under the covers agreements where a white owner would lend the name and be in partnership with the Black person who either owned the horse or was responsible for training the horse.
There are so many scenes that just will not leave me after reading. There's so many that I reread. There's one in particular, and this is Jarrett's father, who was a remarkable trainer of his own, and he taught Jarrett these wonderful skills. There was a point in the story where he has become able to buy his son's freedom. He has finally made enough money. Or he can buy the freedom for the woman that he loves. And I just got chills actually talking about this. Can you tell me about writing that scene?
So, Harry Lewis was a real person who was a very remarkable and respected trainer who was able to buy his own emancipation first. And then, he did have a son, but I don't know the circumstances of his real life in terms of whether his son was able to be brought out of slavery or not. But I looked into a lot of accounts of the marriages of enslaved people or a free man with an enslaved woman, and it was a very difficult thing to have control over your destiny, because if you were both enslaved, your marriage wasn't really legally recognized. You could be torn away from each other at any moment. And so in the novel, I'm trying to explore some of the incredible strains and tensions that would put on a family relationship to live in such a state of precarity.
And as I said, it has stayed with me. Along with Jared's storyline, there are other contemporary storylines, and there's two characters, Jess and Theo. Jess is, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, she's an osteopath preparator in the osteoprep lab. They're fictional characters, but as you alluded to before, the horse's forgotten bones are the real story.
Well, that was true. And, I had the fun of being able to go to the Museum Support Center where all the research work is done. And it's a huge campus out in suburban Maryland. And, when we see the beautiful museums on the mall, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. It is the tip of the iceberg. 98% of the Smithsonian collections are in this campus in Maryland. So there's huge storage areas for priceless works of art and absolutely key scientific specimens, and labs where scientists are beavering away to add to human knowledge. And then there's this funky corner of the whole thing called the bug room, which is where the bones that scientists are going to study are cleaned by beetles. And that was so unexpected to me, that in this high-tech setting, you would have what looks like a walk-in fridge, but when you walk in, it's quite humid inside, because that's what beetles like. And they put down desiccated carcasses of an Arctic wolf or whatever it is that the scientist wants to study. And I tell you, it reminded me of my son's football team at a buffet table. The beetles just pile in there, and they strip the bones without destroying any of the information that the bones contain. So they haven't found a better way to do that yet.
Well, we talked about what Jess does, but there is a page in the beginning of the book that talks about who Jess was as a little girl. And I would love it if you could read that.
Sure can. I have to say that because I had to do so much research to get the voices of other characters right, I thought I would give myself a break and have one character that I could hear really clearly. So Jess is very much based on my own Sydney childhood. I'll confess that. All right. Jess was 7 when she dug up the dog. He'd been dead a year. She and her mum had buried him with ceremony under the flowering red gum in the backyard, and they'd both cried. Her mother wanted to cry again when Jess requested large Tupperware containers for the bones she'd just exhumed. Generally, Jess's mother was the kind of parent who would let her daughter set the house on fire if she thought it could teach something about carbon and oxygen. But she was stricken with a stab of anxiety. Was digging up a beloved pet and macerating its corpse a sign that your child had psychopathic tendencies? Jess tried her best to explain that she'd dug up Milo because she loved him, and that's why she had to see what his skeleton looked like. Beautiful, as she knew it would be. The swoop of the rib cage, the scoop of the eye sockets. Jess loved the interior architecture of living things. Ribs, the protective embrace of them, how they hold delicate organs in a lifelong hug. Eye sockets. No artisan had ever made a more elegant container for a precious thing. Milo's eyes, had been the color of smoky quartz. When Jess touched a finger to the declivities on either side of his delicate skull, she could see those eyes again, the kind gaze of her earliest friend, avid for the next game.
I love learning about Jess, and you are just smiling when you're reading about this. And I gather from reading, you love the science part. Is Jess part you?
Definitely. I was a very nerdy kid, and she's very much based on me. She's very awkward, and she says blundering, stupid things. And so, yes, she's my alter ego.
Your research is brilliant. It is meticulous, but you really are known for that. And I understand the inspiration for the book was a lost painting. Tell me about that.
Yeah, when I went out to the Smithsonian to learn about the bone preparation part of the story and to learn about what they had found out about Lexington from his skeleton while they had it at the Smithsonian for all those years, a curator came up to me and said, you know, we have a painting of the horse. Would you like to see it? And we went to see this beautiful little oil painting of Lexington. And she's looking down at the paperwork and she said, you know, this came in a very unusual bequest. It was given to the Smithsonian by a gallerist from New York City who was very famous in the 1950s called Martha Jackson. And she was super progressive, and she was a champion of the most avant-garde movements in American art in the post-World War II period. And everything else in her bequest was edgy contemporary art of the day, like Pollock's and de Kooning's and Bridget Riley's. And yet, among all these edgy contemporary things was this one 19th century traditional oil painting of a horse. So why did Martha Jackson have that painting? And that set me off on a whole other trajectory. When I started writing about a 19th century racehorse, I didn't know it was going to lead me straight to Jackson Pollock's car crash, but it did.
That was the Jackson Pollock connection the most unusual thing, the most interesting thing that you found in your research, or was there something else?
I really also loved the story of Thomas Scott, who was a painter, an itinerant artist who painted thoroughbred horses in the 19th century. And he was rediscovered because somebody pulled a painting out of a throwaway pile of goods that somebody left on the curb as free stuff. And this gentleman who worked at the University of Kentucky pulled the painting out and was intrigued enough to go and research, and found out that this painter had a remarkable life story and a really remarkable Civil War story, because he was a medic with a volunteer Kentucky unit that fought on the Union side. And so I loved that part of the research too.
Well, what's interesting is that you are so masterful in weaving in these actual historical characters. And there are others. There's Cassius Clay, and I'm not talking about the boxer, and Mary Barclay. So as the writer, is it a challenge? Is it a responsibility to put them in, but to keep them true?
I always try and follow the line of fact as far as I can. And with Cassius Clay, he was such an extraordinary character. There's so much to be found out about him. He was an unusual Kentuckian of his day because he was an emancipationist. He wanted to see the end of slavery through legal means, and he freed all the slaves that he had inherited, which was a considerable number. And it's possible that Cassius Clay, the boxer, was originally named after Cassius Clay, the emancipator, but he had a newspaper called The True American, which argued for emancipation, and that was not popular. So he had to fend off 3 assassination attempts, and in one of them particularly, he was shot. A guy came up and shot him, and he pulled out his Bowie knife, and even as he's bleeding from his gunshot wound, he gets the best of that fight. He really was an extraordinary individual. So, and he was connected to Lexington the horse because he was married to the daughter of the man who originally bred Lexington.
The connection with all of these people to Lexington, the horse, was fascinating. The way you weave this thread through it, this, I guess we can call it this, 7 degrees of separation between Lexington and all of these people. Talking about Civil War, the book you won the Pulitzer Prize for, March, also Civil War era, same era, very different books, very different subjects. Is this an era that you are fascinated with and you wanted another story?
No, I mean, it's an era that I had to, out of self-defense, take an interest in, because my late husband, Tony Horwitz, was completely obsessed with the Civil War. And he was the real historian in the family. But when we were first married, I didn't realize what an obsession of his this was, because we were foreign correspondents at the time for the Wall Street Journal, and our job was covering somewhat more contemporary conflicts in the Middle East and the Balkans and elsewhere. So it wasn't until we came back to the US and we settled in a little village in Virginia. And, there's a saying that the Civil War was fought in 10,000 places, and it soon became clear to me that Tony was going to drag me to every single one of them. So I had to find a way to connect with this interest of his. And my first way was I became very interested in the idea of what happens to idealists when they go to war. And this is the central idea in March, because March is based on the absent father in Louisa May Alcott's classic Little Women. And we know from Louisa May's book that he is off to war as a chaplain because he's an ardent abolitionist. But Louisa May doesn't take us to see what happens to him in war. So it's left to us to speculate what kind of a war a man like that might have experienced and how it would have affected him. So that was my first foray into Civil War historical fiction. And this just happened to be that, the war arrives in Kentucky, which is a border state. And horses are at great risk because both sides want them. And so this affected Lexington's life story, and it's very dramatic. And so, of course, it's a bit of a gift to a novelist to have true history that's that dramatic, affecting your protagonist.
You write with such love for Lexington. And there's a photo, your author photo, in the back of the book with your own horse, and you are beaming. And I was going to ask about your relationship, and you just told me a little minute ago you had not always had horses. It's fairly new for you.
It is, it happened. I was at a writer's retreat in New Mexico, and my room just happened to overlook the corrals. And I was admiring the horses because I love animals very much. And the wrangler said, "You should come on a trail ride." And I said, "I can't ride." And he said, "You can. These horses won't let you fall off." And I had such an ecstatic experience riding through the arroyos. I came home and a friend said, "You've got a couple of acres. You could have a horse. I could give you my horse." A free horse? Well, there's no such thing. Actually, I learned, as I learned many, many things, that, I became obsessed with my horse, and we have a great relationship. So everything that I have experienced and that I feel about her, I have transferred to my character, Jarrett, who, is the groom of Lexington and cares for the horse. And it's the grooms who have the strongest bond, not the owners and not the jockeys, not the trainers, but the groom that's there to feed and brush and tend to the hurts, who really gets to know the horse. And it's the groom's footfall that the horse can recognize when they come into the barn.
There is no such thing as a free horse. We've talked about the book, and no spoilers for those who haven't read it yet, but in the couple minutes we have left, I just want to talk about you. As a kid, what were the kinds of books that you were attracted to?
Oh my gosh, we were avid readers in my family. This is a great gift that both my parents gave me. We would go to the library every Saturday, and we'd all come home with our armfuls of books. And I loved mysteries. And I read a lot of books about English kids because that was what we had in Australia in those days. We were still very much had a kind of colonized imagination. So, but I read, my father read to me before I could read for myself, and he read me a lot of classics, a lot of wonderful books. So, and then I started to get very interested in books by Mary Renault, who wrote about the ancient world. And she really showed me what the potential of historical fiction is. It can take you to a different mindset, a different theology, a very ancient way of being, but the human heart is recognizable, so you care about the characters.
Well, speaking of historical fiction, research or writing, what's that one thing that gets you fired up?
I love stories that are true, that if you made them up, nobody would believe them. And then I need that thing that happened in the past. There can't be too much information, because if I can know everything, if, for example, Jarrett had left a diary that told everything he thought about his situation and his relationship with the horse, there would be no room for the novelist's imagination. So you have to have voids in the historical record. You have to have voices that were silenced by the laws of their own time, or that were lost through neglect. And in that void, I can let my imagination go to work.
Geraldine Brooks, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Anne. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Ann Bocock. I hope you can join us on the next Between the Covers.